In the near future, getting younger isn't a miracle. It's a yearly appointment, like a dental checkup. Except instead of cleaning your teeth, they clean the years off your life. No drama, no ceremony. Just a clinic, a signature, and the quiet feeling that time has become a service. Imagine this. A man in his 50s walks into a clinic in Boston, humming the way people hum when they're pretending they're not terrified. He signs a digital form, confirms his payment plan, 48 monthly installments for 5 extra years of youth, and follows a nurse into a room that looks aggressively clean, not futuristic, just clinically smug. The kind of place that smells like it has a warranty. He sits, rolls up his sleeve. A nurse prepares a syringe filled with a pale blue solution, the exact shade of "this can't possibly be dangerous, right?" The whole injection takes 10 seconds. No flash of light. No sci-fi glow. No sudden urge to run a marathon. She hands him a sticker. "You've been youth boosted." He pretends to laugh, grabs his jacket, and walks out. A normal Tuesday. A forgettable moment. Or at least, that's what it looks like. Because scenes like this tiny slice of speculative fiction, are starting to look less fictional every single week. Scientists are drawing timelines. Investors are setting budgets. Some clinics are already taking pre-registrations. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this scene might be much closer than anyone thinks. Maybe even uncomfortably close. The machinery of the future is already humming, and nobody is fully prepared for what happens when you can book a top-up on life the same way you book a haircut. Here's the unsettling part. The science behind this imaginary Tuesday isn't imaginary at all. It happened, quietly, in a real lab, on real people. Back to 2019. Before youth boosters, before billionaire longevity clubs, before the idea of updating your age became a line item in someone's annual budget. A small clinical experiment called the TRIIM trial, led by biologist Gregory Fahey and analysed by longevity researcher Stephen Horvath, tried a bold idea. Combine growth hormone, vitamin D, zinc, and a diabetes drug to see if the immune system could be rejuvenated. The goal wasn't immortality. It was simply to repair the thymus, the organ that trains your immune cells and shrinks with age. But when the data came back, the researchers froze. The volunteers didn't just improve their immune function. Their biological age, the chemical aging of their DNA, had gone down. On average, they became 2.5 years younger, according to the most accurate epigenetic clocks ever built. Quiet, subtle, yet a silent earthquake in science. For the first time in human history, the arrow of time hesitated. It flickered, and briefly, it bent backwards. This is where our story truly begins. Behind that tiny syringe lies a transformation of colossal scale. Something that could rewrite medicine, economics, politics, and even the definition of being human. In this episode, you'll step inside the laboratories trying to rewind the body itself, meet the researchers pushing the boundaries of what life can survive, look at the nations pouring money into classified longevity programs, and understand why a handful of billionaires are already preparing for a world where death is no longer the final chapter, but a negotiable option. You'll hear how Japanese scientists figured out how to rewind cells almost back to their embryonic state, how dying mice suddenly got their vision back, how companies like Altos Labs are pouring billions into cellular reprogramming. and why more and more experts think the real power of the 21st century won't come from energy or even AI, but from whoever learns to control aging. Before we go any further, welcome to Crazy Science Stories, where science takes the shape of an immersive dystopian podcast. If you want to stay ahead of a future that's arriving faster than anyone expects, consider subscribing. It won't make you younger, but it will keep you in the loop as history quietly rewrites itself. And now comes the strangest part. This first glimpse of human rejuvenation wasn't an accident. It wasn't even the wildest discovery. It was the echo of an idea born in a Japanese lab 20 years ago. An idea so strange it was almost dismissed as a glitch. An idea suggesting that you can rewind time inside the cell itself. To understand how that concept emerged and how it almost got buried, we have to return to the spark that started everything. To the moment a cluster of cells revealed for the first time that aging might not be a law, but a lever. To understand how aging began to run backward, we have to travel back to Japan in 2006. Kyoto, specifically. A quiet university laboratory where nothing looks revolutionary, yet something world-shifting is about to happen. At a small workstation stands a gentle, soft-spoken scientist named Shinya Yamanaka. He's staring at ordinary adult skin cells in a dish. No glow, no drama, just cells doing their daily routine. But Yamanaka has a suspicion that borders on heresy. He thinks aging might not be a slow accumulation of damage after all. He believes it might actually be a loss of information, like a DVD that still works, but whose data has started to fade. If the information is lost, maybe it can be restored. So he tries something bold. He tweaks 4 genes inside those adult cells, adjusting them like dials on a fragile machine. And then the impossible happens. The cells don't just refresh, they reset. They roll back to a youthful, flexible, embryonic-like state known as pluripotency, where a cell can become almost anything again. It is the scientific equivalent of discovering that the human body has a hidden rewind button. These 4 genes will later be named the Yamanaka factors, and in 2012 they earn Yamanaka the Nobel Prize. Overnight, aging itself begins to look less like destiny and more like a software error. This leads to one of the biggest shifts in biology. The idea that aging is driven by epigenetic drift, meaning the instructions that tell our cells how to function become messy, scrambled, or faded over time. The cell is still there, but its operating manual is corrupted. Then, in 2013, another shock arrives. A data scientist named Stephen Horvath creates the first pan-tissue epigenetic clock, a tool capable of reading the real biological age of almost any cell in the human body. Blood, muscle, bone, brain, all can be measured with astonishing precision using tiny chemical tags called methyl groups. Suddenly, aging has a number. A number that can move forward or backward. And if you can measure age this precisely, you can also measure whether a treatment actually makes someone younger. It's the moment where anti-aging steps out of fantasy and into quantifiable science. But there is a problem, a terrifying one. Full reprogramming, turning all 4 Yamanaka factors on at once, resets cells too far. They forget who they are. And when cells forget their identity, they start dividing uncontrollably. Not exactly the kind of youth anyone is looking for. So the field stalls. The magic exists, but using it safely seems impossible. It's like discovering a formula for immortality written on a live grenade. Yet in the background, scientists begin to wonder, what if the solution isn't full reprogramming? What if the secret is partial reprogramming, turning the factors on in short controlled pulses instead of blasting the cells with a full reset? A dimmer switch instead of a detonator. And when researchers finally begin trying that approach, reality starts bending in ways no one expected. Old mice begin regaining youth. Fragile tissues recover strength. Cells behave as if someone restored the missing pages of their operating manual. But one experiment, one bold test on aging mice, will change everything. A moment where the boundary between science and science fiction blurs, and the impossible becomes something you can film under a microscope. That is where we're heading next. The real turning point didn't come from theory. It came from a set of late-night experiments that looked at first like scientific madness. In the years following Yamanaka's discovery, research teams at Harvard, the Salk Institute, and a handful of obsessively driven labs began trying something no one thought would work. Instead of blasting cells with all 4 Yamanaka genes continuously, the dangerous method that erased identities, they pulsed them gently in controlled intervals. The idea sounded ridiculous, turning youth on and off like a light switch, rewinding time in small bursts. It felt like trying to fix a clock by tapping it. But as the first results came in, disbelief spread through the labs like static electricity. Cells didn't lose their identity. They didn't turn cancerous. They simply got younger. And then came the milestone that changed everything. In 2016, at the Salk Institute in California, Juan Carlos Izpisua Belmonte and his team ran a bold experiment on mice with progeria, a disease that accelerates aging. Using partial reprogramming, they extended the animal's lifespan by roughly 30%. 30. Not by adjusting diet, not by tweaking metabolism, but by reaching into the software of the cell and restoring information. The scientific world froze. If a mouse could regain time, what about a human? Then, in 2020, the same team took things a step further. They reprogrammed the retinal ganglion cells of old mice, a part of the nervous system notoriously difficult to repair. The results sounded like science fiction. Damaged optic nerves regenerated. Old mice regained vision. Blindness reversed, not with surgery, but with cellular time travel. And it didn't stop there. Other labs reported improvements in organ function, faster muscle repair, better metabolic health, a reversal of age-related biomarkers so extreme that some researchers tested their equipment twice, convinced the machines were lying. Behind these breakthroughs were people who often looked more like characters from a novel than from academia. Biologists who slept in their labs, billionaire funders who demanded private briefings, and researchers who would whisper their craziest ideas only after midnight when the building was empty and the air felt conspiratorial. Everyone sensed they were brushing against a boundary that wasn't supposed to be crossed. But science never moves forward without shadows. And the shadows began to grow. Some experiments produced rejuvenation so fast it frightened the researchers who watched it. Others suggested that even partial reprogramming could make cells forget their place if pushed too far. A few tests had to be halted quietly with no papers published because the results didn't behave the way anyone expected. That was the moment when governments started paying attention. Once agencies realised what these labs had been doing behind soundproof doors, turning age into a variable, a lever, a modifiable parameter, the story stopped being an academic curiosity. It became something far more volatile, something with geopolitical weight, ethical consequences, and stakes high enough to provoke secrecy. And the next part of this journey is where everything swings out of the lab and into the real world, where nations, corporations, and intelligence agencies begin to fight over a discovery that could change the future of humanity. The moment rejuvenation escaped the petri dish, the story stopped belonging to scientists. It crossed an invisible line and entered the world of geopolitics, a world where discoveries don't just shift paradigms, they shift power. It began quietly, a leaked memo here, a strange procurement order there. Emails hinting that private longevity labs were being pressured to share preliminary data with national security agencies. Nothing public, nothing confirmed, but enough whispers to suggest that governments were no longer watching from the sidelines. Around the same time, something else happened. Money. The kind of money that bends reality. Altos Labs emerged almost overnight with an avalanche of funding. Backed by figures like Jeff Bezos and Yuri Milner, it became one of the richest biotech startups in history, with billions committed to cellular rejuvenation. Their goal was simple, terrifying, and fascinating. Decode the machinery of aging and build a controlled method to reverse it. And while the West scrambled to organize its billionaires into a scientific army, China made its own move. State-backed institutes began pouring resources into longevity research companies linked to national innovation programs, accelerated their work. Chinese investors funneled money into foreign labs. Rumors surfaced of early-stage human rejuvenation studies, unconfirmed, but echoed often enough to unsettle intelligence analysts. Suddenly, anti-aging wasn't a scientific curiosity. It was a strategic asset, a potential weapon, a path to dominance in a century already defined by biotechnology. Bioethicists sounded alarms. Security analysts issued quiet, anxious reports. Because once you accept that aging can be slowed, or even reversed, a chilling question rises to the surface. Who gets access? Is rejuvenation a treatment for everyone? Or a luxury reserved for the powerful? Does a nation with younger, sharper leaders gain an advantage? What happens when soldiers stay biologically 30 for decades? What happens when billionaires outlive the systems meant to regulate them? These were not abstract puzzles anymore. They were immediate, structural threats. If age becomes editable, everything built on age, retirement, healthcare, careers, family, politics, begins to crack. A world where people live to 150 or 200 years is not a future. It's an upheaval. And that was the turning point nobody wanted. The moment society realised this research wasn't about wrinkles or longevity fantasies. It was about control of the clock, the most valuable clock on Earth. And as soon as the world understood that aging was no longer a fixed law, but a flexible rule, the future itself changed shape. Because reversing aging is only the beginning. The real shockwave comes afterward, when millions of people start living longer than any system was designed to handle. Time stretches, expectations warp, stability fractures, and everything we think we know about life begins to twist. What comes next isn't just a scientific challenge, it's a civilizational stress test. If reversing aging sounds like a distant fantasy, the future it creates feels even stranger. Because once rejuvenation becomes real, even partially, the world we know begins to warp in ways no economist, no doctor, no government, and definitely no philosopher is prepared to handle. Picture a hospital in the late 20s. A place where rejuvenation treatments are lined up next to routine blood tests. A nurse calls your name, you sit down, and instead of getting cholesterol checked, someone gently asks, "So, would you like to drop 5 biological years today, or spread it out over a few sessions?" Age becomes a menu, not a sentence. Retirement systems buckle almost immediately. Pension plans designed for 80-year lifespans begin imploding when 90-year-olds show up with the joints of 50-year-olds and the enthusiasm of teenagers who just discovered caffeine. Entire governments scramble, insisting this is a temporary imbalance, while quietly panicking because nothing in history has prepared us for a workforce that refuses to age out. Families start stretching in bizarre directions. You no longer have 3 living generations. You have 5, sometimes 6. Birthday dinners begin to look like timelines that refuse to end grandparents, and great-grandparents argue about who gets to sit at the kids' table, because everyone looks roughly the same age. Chronological age becomes meaningless. The number on your passport becomes a trivia fact, not a biological truth. And this isn't fantasy. It's the logical extension of what the science is already showing. Partial reprogramming can rejuvenate cells without erasing identity. Plasma dilution, shown in 2020 by Irina Comboy, resets inflammatory markers and improves biological age measurements in human subjects. Senolytics like PCC1 obliterate senescent zombie cells in mice, extending lifespan by around 9%, not by slowing aging, but by removing the cellular trash that accelerates it. Gene editing, once limited to rare diseases, is now creeping toward age-related disorders. NAD boosters, mitochondrial therapies, epigenetic editing. It's a buffet of interventions, all pointing in the same direction. Aging is losing its monopoly. Now imagine what happens when all these treatments stack. A world where cognitive aging slows to a crawl. A world where muscles regenerate faster than they break down. A world where diseases that once defined old age become manageable glitches. A world where the biological cliff of decline becomes a long, slow ramp you barely notice. Funny, absolutely. Terrifying. Also, absolutely. Because humans are not designed for this. Our social systems aren't designed for this. Even our psychology isn't designed for this. We built civilization around the idea that life has stages: childhood, adulthood, decline, death. Take those away and everything becomes slippery. Suddenly, 40 becomes the new 20, 70 becomes the new 40, and 20-year-olds start panicking about falling behind because their parents just signed up for a rejuvenation program and look better than their Tinder profile. And maybe that's the real surprise here. Not how close we are to reversing aging, but how unprepared we are for the world that follows. Because once you break the clock, life no longer means what it used to. Everything stretches, everything bends, everything loses its familiar shape. And that leads us to the final question, the one every scientist whispers only when the lights go off, long after the data has been logged and the lab has gone quiet. For thousands of years, aging has been humanity's oldest companion. Not an enemy, not a punishment, just a quiet gravity that pulls every life toward its horizon. It shaped our choices, our urgency, our stories. It taught us that every moment mattered because none of them would last forever. Now, for the first time, that gravity is shifting. Not vanishing, but bending, the way light bends around a star. The old script is still there, yet its ink is fading at the edges. The story of aging is no longer a sentence, it's becoming a draft. And that leaves us with a question far stranger than immortality. If time stops chasing us, who do we become? Do longer lives make us wiser, or simply more inventive in finding new ways to waste the years? Will youth that stretches across decades inspire us to be braver, gentler, more curious? Or will we repeat the same patterns, just with more time to loop through them? When age is no longer a cliff, does life feel lighter or heavier? No one knows. Maybe no one can know yet. But imagine this. A quiet night in the future. The world older, yet somehow younger. Buildings hum with people who have lived long enough to see their own past from several angles. In a small apartment high above the city, someone sits by a window, watching the last traces of sunset melt into the skyline. Their reflection in the glass looks calm, timeless, almost unhurried. Not because they escaped aging, but because aging has changed shape. They don't know how many decades lie ahead. Only that time, for the first time, feels negotiable. And in that stillness, a thought rises like a tide. If life finally becomes long enough, what will we choose to do with it? Because the story of aging isn't ending, it's unfolding. And the next chapter, the one no civilization has ever written, depends on what we decide now. So let me ask you something real, something that might matter more than any breakthrough we've talked about tonight. If someone handed you a pill that could double, maybe even triple your lifespan, would you take it? And if you did, what would you actually do with all those extra years of youth? I'd love to hear your thoughts. That was Crazy Science Stories, where science bends, time blinks, and reality always has a hidden seam. Stay curious. The future is only getting stranger.